great to see you all during this Easter season on this beautiful evening. And we are about to get into the third chapter of Joshua, where things get very exciting. And we have a prop here in front of me. I think you probably know what this represents if you did your homework. I won't ask you to tell me right now.
Do they actually know where that is? Do they actually have the site? Because I remember in seminary we were talking about there was a site that they found fairly, I think like 20, 40 years ago that was supposed to have been rocks. But I think they had the Ten Commandments. Maybe they altered that.
I don't know. That's a good question. I believe the stones they moved, though, were quite large. So it's possible. But
I just wondered if you saw them when you were in Israel.
No, I did not see them. No. Okay, everybody. Well, Adam, would you please start out? We're going to do a little background biblical history before we get into chapter 3. And I'd like Adam to read Genesis 15, verses 13 to 16. And as you hear him read it, just keep in mind the promises that come to fulfillment in Joshua's lifetime and what was said long before his lifetime itself.
Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know of a surety that your descendants will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be slaves there, and they will be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation which they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete."
Okay, thank you. So that was a promise to Abraham, a promise of territory that would one day be taken by God's people, and that's where we find ourselves as we begin chapter 3, the beginning of the conquest, the crossing of the Jordan. Now, what I hope we do tonight, gentlemen, is get through chapters 3 and 4, up through verse 1 of the 5th chapter. So what we'll do is read all of chapter 3 and chapter 4, and then discuss it and go back and look at it. Now, if you have your study guide, you'll see that the third lesson takes us exactly that far, Joshua 3:1 to 5:1. So we may not cover it all tonight, perhaps we will, but that's what we'll aim to do. If you filled in some of the spaces in your book, if you've got it, feel free to share as the questions are asked. And what I'd like to do is have us read in pieces, and what I will do is begin, and then George, I'll have you carry on, and then, where's Harlan?
Here.
There he is, okay. And we'll get through chapter 3 together, okay? Joshua started early the next morning and left Acacia Grove with all the Israelites. They went as far as the Jordan and stayed there before crossing. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God carried by the Levitical priests, you must break camp and follow it. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between yourselves and the ark. Don't go near it, so that you can see the way to go, for you haven't traveled this way before." Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow." Then he said to the priests, "Take the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people." So they carried the ark of the covenant and went ahead of them. The Lord spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses. Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the waters, stand in the Jordan." George, could you pick up at verse 9 and go to through verse 13?
And Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "Hereby you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Pezerites, the Gershites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is to pass over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man, and when the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan shall be stopped from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap."
Thank you, George. Harlan, can you take it through the end of chapter 3?
So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who bore the Ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped in the brink of the water, the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose in a heap far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were wholly cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. And while all Israel was passing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan.
Thank you. Patrick, Mark, and Ron, would you be able to read chapter 4 for us? Patrick, go verse 1 through 9. Mark, do 10 through 18, and then Ron, finish that chapter for us.
When all the people were safely across the river, the Lord said to Joshua, "Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell the men to take 12 stones from where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan and pile them up at the place where you camp tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men and told them, "Go into the middle of the Jordan, in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean to you?' Then you can tell them, 'They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across.' These stones will stand as a permanent memorial among the people of Israel." So the men did as Joshua told them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had commanded Joshua. They carried them to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. Joshua also built another memorial of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. The memorial remains there to this day.
That's great. We want 10 till which?
Through 18.
For the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished, that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people passed over in haste, and when all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priests passed over before the people. The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had bidden them. About 40,000 ready armed for war passed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan." Joshua therefore commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before.
And the people came out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan did Joshua pitch in Gilgal. And he spake unto the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean these stones? Ye shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan from before you, until ye were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over. That all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that ye might fear the Lord your God forever.
Thank you. Phil, will you read the first verse of the 5th chapter?
Now when all the Aramaic kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear. and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites.
Wasn't that great? Now, the word Gilgal, where they set up the stones, is a place derived from the Hebrew word for roll. And so going back to your point, Danny, these were probably very large stones. They had to roll them, several men on a stone most likely. So whether they're still in existence there or not, I don't know, but they're most likely very large. What we'll do is use our study guide to guide us through these two chapters, including that one verse of the other chapter, chapter 5, and talk about what we observe, how we interpret it, and how we apply it. Remember those three components of Bible study: observation, interpretation, application. Okay, question 1 says, identify the subject of each of the three groups of paragraphs. So if we were to break up these three groups of paragraphs in the 3rd chapter, what are really three components here? Three actions that we see between these two chapters. Your headings, if you have a Bible with headings, that might help you a little bit. So chapter 3, what's the main point of that whole paragraph of the chapter?
Passing over.
The crossing.
Yeah, passing over the Jordan.
Okay. Right. And then the next thing that happens,
Oh, does he know apparently? It looks like they are.
what do you have for us?
Your foot. You want to show that on the camera?
Sure. This is Gilgal?
Supposedly.
Okay, well, this could be a reenactment of stones, we don't really know, but this is Gilgal. Thank you, Dan. So at the crossing, if you filled in that little box, I know some of you just got the study guides, but what the author's asking are, as we look at what we just read, chapter 3, verse 1 through chapter 5, verse 1, if you were to break it up into three groups of paragraphs, what might they be? The first is the crossing, as Adam said. Does anybody have anything for number 2? Memorial stones? Okay. And what would a third group be within these paragraphs, if you could call each chapter a paragraph? How about the water resuming and the fear of the nations? Okay. Okay, who are the main characters or groups of people in the different parts? So in the crossing itself, who are the characters there?
The priests.
Representatives of 12 tribes.
And for the memorial stones,
All the 12 tribes, right?
12 representatives, right? And then for the water resuming, and a little hint about this is you've got 2.5 tribes involved. Remember their names? The Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. And we read about their history a couple of weeks ago. Okay. And then you've got, from what Bill read, a few other characters. The Amorite kings across the Jordan to the west, and all the Canaanite kings near the sea. Now, just to interpret why they were so terrified, why were they so terrified hearing about this account of the crossing of the river?
A lot of people coming across.
A lot of people.
Well, they probably knew what happened 40 years ago, so.
They knew about the parting of the Red Sea and how the mightiest nation in their known world, the Egyptians, were drowned.
As we studied last week, obviously they were already in fear because of what God had done with the daughters with the people. And now he shows his glory again by splitting the Jordan, and they come across.
Just to divert from the study guide for a minute, let's talk about the Ark. I'm just so intrigued by the Ark of the Covenant. I always have been intrigued by it. It wasn't just because I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark as a child and wondered what it was, although that was pretty interesting when everybody melted. I don't know if you remember that part,
Yeah.
when they dared to touch the Ark and open it. But do you remember what was in the Ark?
the broken pieces of the Ten Commandments.
Right, 10 Commandments, exactly. And the New Testament suggests there were a few other things as well. Aaron's staff, and a jar of something that sustained them in the wilderness. Manna. So it was believed that there were the 10 Commandments, the stone tablets, Aaron's staff, and the manna. And that represented the holiness of God, the ark. Now, do you remember how the ark came to be if we think about Old Testament history? Who was told to build the ark and how to do it?
God, didn't God command it, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, do you know who he told?
We had Moses.
Moses.
Direct one of the, I forget his name, but he was a specific person.
Yeah, so it was very intricate and detailed. It was overlaid with gold. It had to be just the right length. And there were two images on top called the mercy seat. And we could talk much more about the ark, but for our purposes tonight, it's important to know what it was historically and what it was used for. And so what do you see about the ark in this particular context? For instance, were the people allowed to go up near it? No.
It was God's presence for them, even going back to the, for history, isn't it? It was, and what, in fact, this past Easter Mass, you talked about how the curtain in the temple, and that's when finally God was supposed to be everywhere, not just supposedly in the temple. Am I correct?
Good insight.
Weren't they supposed to look at it though when they were,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Keep your eye on it.
It was like a beacon, right?
Was supposed to follow it into the figure.
So it went before them, and they kept how much of a distance?
1,000 yards.
1,000 yards. So keep your distance, but keep your eye on the holiness of God. And so, as the priests step into the water,
Water stops.
Yeah.
right?
And
Verse-
this was flood season.
This was the high season. This is the rainy season. Yes. So it was a mighty river, and we're told already that people would be nervous about it. When the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, come to rest in the Jordan's waters, its waters will be cut off. The water flowing downstream will stand up in a mass. So what would that look like? I'm trying to get an image for that. Did anybody see that movie of Gods and Kings? Not that that's an exact description of the book of Exodus, but it's about Moses. It was in the theaters not long ago.
Did you like that?
Well, I won't say whether I liked it or not, because I don't want to advocate for that on camera here. But what I will say is the cinematography was very interesting. It showed a wall of water, which you had to admit was pretty interesting if you saw the movie. And so I'm trying to picture what a wall of water is not a natural phenomenon. I mean, a wave or tsunami is, but they're moving. But in this case, what do you think's happening? Just, it stopped.
Was it not the angels who came, I thought like in the metaphor at least of the angels coming and I guess like the angel of death or whatever, when it went before them or behind them in the different readings I've done over time, that's what did it, was it not? I mean, it's possible, I guess, that God could have literally did it without the angels, but it seems like he used his angels.
What did they follow by day and by night in the Exodus? Do you remember?
Pillar of cloud.
Pillar of cloud by day, fire by night, right? Yeah. It's like the young boy who was asked if he knew who Lot's wife was, and he said yes, she was apparently a ball of fire by night and a pillar of salt by day. So you have to get these descriptions right when you say them. So it's a pillar of fire by night. So they were walking through the night and the day, and they were following that. So they were accustomed to following the holiness of God. But the ark specifically had power. And at this point, I'd like Ray to read his reading.
I got a question, first. The Red Sea split, right?
It parted, yes.
It parted, but this didn't part. This like held back the rushing water, and there was a wall just on one side rather than walls on both sides.
It was a flowing river, so when you dam it,
Okay.
the southern
I'm
end's
just
just gonna
thinking what
float
the-
away.
What the significance, what the theological significance of the fact of a rushing river, a wall of water, rather than a splitting of a sea. Just, whatever.
That's why I asked about it, because I'm trying to get an image myself. That's a good point.
It
It's
physically-
different.
Yeah. I'm just saying physically, it's like creating a dam out of water as opposed to a dam out of whatever. It's like, and it's also not like a falls where it's falling over somebody where you'd see it. It's just, it's hard to picture, you know?
Well, what
It's
is-
like
I'm
an
thinking,
aquarium
is
without the
Red
glass.
Sea just a sea, a still body of water, or is it a flowing body of water?
Just a body of water, and I would imagine just it was a
Yeah,
wall.
I mean, so it's a still body of water, you'd have to part it on both sides.
Right.
If it's a flowing river, you just stop it on one and the rest on.
Right. But I'm just wondering, what's the significance of that? Why, when the Israelites left, they left through a sea,
Right.
and it had a split, whereas when they went into the kingdom, but when they went into the land, they went through a river which was rushing and it was held back. This might be just going nowhere, but it's just,
Significance is the power of the Lord.
Well, you got some homework, report back to us.
okay, I will. Anyway.
I was just wondering, is the Jordan River, is it as big as the Reed Sea? Because the reason why I ask you is because we've been told that it's a mistranslation of the Red Sea. So I was always told that the Reed Sea's a little bit weaker.
Yes, some historical critics have said that the Sea of Reeds is actually what they meant, not the Red Sea, and that there were passable places on it. But that's biblical historical criticism, trying to make sense of things and take out the miracle of the story and explain it scientifically. But even that doesn't necessarily explain it, so we don't know. So I'll read a bit out of our comments as we're considering these things, and then we'll go back to the text. As Israel lodged there on the brink of the river, preparatory to crossing, officers were sent throughout the camp with clear instructions for the people. The order was to keep their eye on the ark and follow their leader. If ever they needed to follow, it was now. The seething, foaming waters surely looked like a river of death. The Israelites had not gone that way before, but there was no cause for alarm because the promise was, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth over before you into Jordan. The ark of the covenant, which speaks typically of Christ, was to go before them. And in Jordan, it was to stand firmly, its presence staying the mad waters and allowing the Israelites to pass over safely. God never sends his people out, but that he treads the pathway first. Where the ark of the covenant of the Lord is, the waters of death can never overflow. So, as we think about the holiness of the ark, I'd like Ray to read an account about the ark, which comes at a much later date. We're now talking about the time of King David, but the ark would continue throughout Israelites' future. And this is one example where the holiness of the ark is so powerful that something surprising happens.
2 Samuel 6, David again brought together out of Israel chosen men, 30,000 in all. He and all his men set out from Bala and Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim that are on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Aho, sons of Amminadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it. And Aho was walking in front of it. David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with song and with harps, lyres, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nikon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day the place is called Parish Uzzah.
Thank you, Ray. That's one of the unforgettable stories when it comes to the ark. So here was this great celebration. King David was dancing, and as the story goes on, he dances, and his wife at the time, Michal, shames him, and that's a whole other account. But the interesting thing is Uzzah, who's simply just trying to keep the ark from falling to the ground because the oxen have stumbled, touches it, drops dead. Now, the account suggests that's because he did something irreverent. And I take that story out for us because it shows that as we look at the history, you're supposed to stand 1,000 feet back if you're not a priest. And in Uzzah's case, he was allowed to be near it, but he was not allowed to touch it. So the holiness of God, the importance of the ark, it's something fundamental in Israel's history. And as we look at it now, it's very obvious the way this is written, that it's the power of the ark, as God is present, that makes the miracle happen. It's not the priests. It's not Joshua. It's the power of God as made manifest in the ark.
The ark.
Question, when the ark was in the middle of the river, and all the people went by, they were probably very close to the ark.
That's a great point.
I'm kind of curious, you know, they had to wait until, well, they had to wait 2,000 yards behind it as the priest went into the water.
And do you remember how many people we're talking about?
Yeah.
And 2.5 million plus
Right.
aged, infirm, animals, kids.
Well, maybe that's the difference that Ray was talking about, because it's a river and stopped on one side. The ark could be 10 feet from the wall of water, and the river continued to flow.
Right.
So the expanse of the Jordan would have been dry for us all the way to the Dead Sea theoretically. So, I mean, they could have spread, I don't know, 1,000 wide and crossed over rather than having to walk through a narrow passage. I think we always picture the Red Sea of being this narrow channel that they kind of have to file through, where here, I mean, they have a whole dry riverbed. I don't know.
I'm wondering if
stretched
the
out
wall
for
of water
10 miles.
was up near Adam, because there was some reference in there that the water was stopped way upstream. So maybe that's where the wall of water was. It wasn't very close to where the ark was.
Good points.
What Ray just read said that David got angry. I wonder what conversation took place between him and God when that happened.
Right. The life of King David was one of great enthusiasm and emotion toward God, as the Psalms reveal. And the fact that we're told that David was angry that his friend Uzzah had been struck down by trying to help the ark, it just shows that David, even David, was struggling to comprehend the holiness of God, as we all must.
What I was wondering is that, they're supposed to look at the ark, and that's like faith that the ark would hold back the waters. And what happens if they, a bunch of them look the other way? Does that mean they lose faith and, maybe you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, the priests were obedient, and, you have to wonder, if we're talking about 2 million people crossing over, how long did it take? Was that heavy, just to hold that ark that long? No, they did it. And the other thing is, note that there's a connection between their feet and the dry ground, and I think of the story from Moses' time where he was told to take off his shoes because he was on holy ground. So there's holy ground going on underneath this ark that people are crossing over. And we can apply this to our understanding of the faith as Christians, and that it's the holiness of Christ that gives us holy ground wherever we go. And we're going to look at a scripture at the end of our time about that.
I think it's important what Bob just said, that it's not, it doesn't depend on us looking to God. God will hold back the waters regardless of us. God is God. We just, even if because if we're not looking at God, that means we're screwing up, but that doesn't change God from doing his thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the power or the capacity to prevent God from doing what God wants to do.
That's a good point, because you have to believe that out of 2 million people, many of those people were maybe faithless or not
Right. Or young
focused,
kids, or you just-
distracted.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. But what do you think they were also thinking? Wow, we heard about this with our ancestors, crossing the Red Sea. It's happening again. I mean, that could be very invigorating, exciting. It's not like miracles happen all the time. That certainly didn't back then.
Wait till they have to be circumcised. I'm sure they weren't celebrating that.
So how many years was this from the time that the Red Sea was parted and the Jordan?
40.
40 years.
Yep. And the wilderness, as this author in the study guide points out, Egypt represents captivity, and he applies it to sort of the person who's held captive before they open their life up to the Lord. And then he likens the 40 years in the wilderness to coming to faith but remaining somewhat disobedient And then crossing the Jordan into the promised land is where obedience and faith come together. That's sort of the author's theme to the study guide, so it's interesting to think about that. So for the 40 years, there was a lot of grumbling and disobedience. And so Joshua will, as he's doing now, bring them into the promised land. So the question number 2 is, what lesson is taught by the peoples following the Ark of the Covenant and following the priests? I think we've discussed that just now, about faith, keeping your eye on God. Now, question 3, which is based on the 5th verse of the 3rd chapter. Why were the people commanded to sanctify themselves? What do you suppose was involved here? Let me read that verse again. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow. So before telling the priests to take the Ark of the Covenant and go on ahead of the people, Joshua tells the 2 million people, however many there were, to sanctify or consecrate yourselves. What does that mean to consecrate or to sanctify, as we understand it?
Wasn't it, I guess like the cleaning ritual wasn't developed at this point fully, but I'm assuming that's what that meant. Because to be holy, right, kadosh, the Hebrew word for it, means to be set aside, literally. So I guess, I'm assuming, it's just a guess, it was some form of cleanliness. The problem is, you're out in the desert, how can it stay clean? They're out there for 40 years. I mean, it just, obviously they had the oral tradition, but I'm sure, like I say, as you'll read later on, they had to get circumcised again, so they weren't fully practicing all the rules yet either. So I mean, I don't know, I'm assuming, again, it's clean.
Okay, so it could be a cleanliness code that they needed to enact. What other way could you consecrate yourself before something like this?
Well, the law of Moses had people sanctify themselves through ritual. If they touched their body, if they were unclean, they would have to sanctify themselves to be clean to go. And
That's why I
celebrate.
said cleaning, some kind of cleaning.
What about inwardly? Do you think there was some connotation of that as well? How would you get ready if you'd been told, all right, after all this time, this is the day we're crossing, sanctify yourself, get ready? What would you do? Spiritually.
Fast.
Fast?
Fast.
Okay.
Repent.
Ask
Okay.
for forgiveness.
Ask for
repent,
forgiveness.
Pray.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're either very excited or very terrified because you know something major is about to happen and you call upon God? And what do you sometimes say or think or pray? Help? I don't know how this is going to work. Help me, Jesus.
I will be done.
Thy will be done.
I think you want to make sure everything's in order too, because, as you're going forth, you never know what's going to happen. If you got a little bit of fear or something, you want to make sure that, you have things in order.
That's right. In one parish I served in, one of my fellow priests made an announcement at the altar. He said, this morning we're going to have an adult ed class called To See God is to Die. And I encourage the congregation to get their affairs in order before coming to class, because you never know what's going to happen. And so you have to really focus on God and think about what that means. We talk about God a lot, but each one of us could be with God in God's fullness in a minute from now. We just don't know. And so is there a way to be constantly consecrating or sanctifying yourself? That's a question I put out there. As men who are here and there and about in all kinds of places, we're driving in traffic, we're sometimes flying in airplanes, always in danger without realizing it. Some of us have health issues. One of our men tonight, who's normally right next to me, is in the ER tonight. You can pray for him with heart issues. So, we're all very fragile. And so what does it mean to consecrate yourself in this day and age?
Well, obviously focus on the scriptures, try to, as the other gentleman said, repent. That's a big part of our Christianity, which I think that has been forgotten in our society. There is that lack of, for lack of a better word, accountability. Sin is such a part of our society. I mean, I really feel sorry for this generation. They say it's the least religious of all of them. And you watch television on a regular basis. It's so confusing in morality now that it's terrifying. How can you be holy? Like if I literally did what some Christians in my seminary wanted to do, was they told us not to watch any TV whatsoever. A lot of TV it has pretty much soft porn on it now, sadly. There's no way to, do you like just shun from society outright? Where do you toe the line? And that's the problem too. Do you want to be relevant to people? Can you like say, oh, well, this is not the right way to live or not? You know, then you don't want to come off judgmental. But the society, where do you blur? Because you want to be honest with people that, especially people ask me questions about spirituality. Am I honest? But I come off judgmental that way too.
That's a good point, Danny. I think about priorities in life and how we can live. And sometimes in Sunday school they talk about that children's acronym, JOY, Jesus, others, you. You know, sometimes we put ourselves first. You know, me, others, oh God, I mean, you know. So there's a reshuffling that happens when we come to God. And that's what I think I'm getting at when I ask you, how do you consecrate or sanctify yourself? And it's a daily discipline for us, is to be right with the Lord. Some of us do quiet time in the morning, read a devotional. That's one way to do it. Now you have apps on phones, whether it's Bible in 1 Year or Oswald Chambers, Light Up Must for Its Highest, or any number of devotionals you can use, which gives you the mind of God before you even start your day. Some people insist on doing that before their feet even hit the floor because they know their propensity towards selfishness and self-will run riot, and we've all lived that way. So something that happened in the context of Joshua is very applicable to us today in that way, in that we're called to sanctify ourselves, consecrate ourselves. And we actually say that in the Eucharist, those very words. Sanctify these thy gifts of bread and wine, sanctify ourselves. So we carry on that tradition. So we don't know exactly what they were doing to consecrate themselves because the scriptures don't tell us, even though the author asks us this in the book. But I think we've gotten at some good points, which is the cleanliness code, and you've got the interstate.
Oswald Chambers sets the bar so high, I don't think you ever feel sanctified.
What verse was that
Always
again,
come
David?
away feeling
Study Bible will
inadequate.
say what?
3:5.
3:5.
Yep. The next question is, what verse later on in the story refers to the fulfillment of 3:7? Now I'll read 3:7. The Lord spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that I will be with you, just as I was with Moses." In the 4th chapter, about halfway through, you'll see the fulfillment of that. Can anybody find it?
This is
14.
Okay, verse 14. Can you read that, David?
Hang on one sec. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, as they stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life.
All right, more than one miracle is involved in the story of the Jordan crossing.
Can I
Yes,
make a
Ron.
comment about that?
Please.
I mean, the one thing that's interesting to me is, because I think we talked about leadership, when you kind of look at, Joshua really has a leadership challenge. I mean, when you look at, he's supposed to take all these disobedient people and get 2 million people to follow him. You say, where's his source of power? I mean, you look at, like, I'm just thinking like leadership today. He's not like Saddam Hussein or that's trying to, like, coerce people and they get them to follow him. So I look at these two passages is really, God kind of setting him up, or basically giving him the position of leadership in front of the people, so that the miracles help reinforce that. To really, I think it helps him address this leadership challenge and get the people to follow.
Yeah, he's definitely got a leadership challenge. He's already got 2.5 tribes that are content just to sit on the other side of the river. He's kind of worked out a
Right.
deal with they'll come across and lead the charge for them right now, but clearly, in my opinion, Moses wouldn't have 2.5 tribes on the other side of the river. The whole group going across, and he's got to keep this group together in this
Exactly.
particular group until they get where they're going.
Well, I also think that when he commands the priests to go into the Jordan, that's kind of when everybody says, okay, this is the guy, obviously, that we must follow, because they went in and they stopped the water, and he's the one that commanded it to go in, and and that was that, and they were all like, okay.
So that sign strengthened his leadership. It solidified it in
Right.
people's minds.
Right.
Good point. Well, some of you are in management, and managing people's one of the toughest parts of leadership. And so you're picking up on some good themes here, which is you've got divisions and some divisive people in them, and you've got a lot of people. And no doubt, just as they question Moses' authority, there will be people that will have to be convinced. Yet, unlike Moses, who had grumblers and things like that, we don't see that happening at this point, do we? And God's power is doing it all. Joshua's authority is in God's power alone. It's been that way from the beginning. And when he was anointed, when Moses laid hands on Joshua, God commissioned him to be the leader. And we see God backing it up with his works of power.
Well, he hasn't really had any setbacks yet. I mean, everything is kind of going his way so far, and things are kind of building momentum because he hasn't had any really significant setbacks or adversity at this point. So, but we'll see as things go on.
Well, Joshua at least had the ark, or the presence of God. Moses didn't have that. The people very rarely saw Moses getting a direct command, or actually, well, they never really saw God doing the leading. They saw Moses doing the leading, so they could question that because they didn't see the presence of God, whereas they see the presence of God. So Joshua, and God is saying, this is my man. So I think Joshua's got something that Moses didn't have, the presence of God.
And Joshua's life up until this point has been unwavering faithfulness, which he displayed in the earlier campaigns and which he has continued to show. Just complete obedience, not talking back to God or losing his temper, as a certain Moses was known to do. Of course, who could blame Moses? 40 years in the wilderness with these people. I mean, I thought he did a pretty good job, but clearly I'm not God. So, but Joshua is the next one. Yes.
I think Ray just said that they didn't have, during Moses' time, they didn't have the presence of God, but I see differently, because when they were traveling in the desert by day and by night, God was leading them with a cloud over them. So they had the presence. They were just hard-headed people. They were just more rebellious than the new generation.
Good comments. Thank you.
Don't forget, Moses saw God face to face. So, I mean, he didn't have, they saw him altered. So maybe they didn't see him talking to God, but they knew he was different because his face shined. And they were so afraid of it that he had to wear a veil.
So this question 5. Oh, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
was going to ask one question, just what we would said got me thinking. We had the fuzzy on the timeline, so there's the cloud and the pillar of fire. But what point was the Ark of the Covenant introduced? Obviously they had the tablets, but if I remember correctly, it was kind of after they made their own idols in the wilderness. These Israelites for 400 years were under captivity and sort of living in the Egyptian world and used to sort of, you had an idol to worship, you had a thing that you could look to as your faith. I'm just wondering, is the Ark almost kind of, well, you want to contain me and put me into this box, so here's the box that holds my power and my glory. This is going to be the symbol you can follow.
You mean it's something they could identify with as former idolaters, that sort of thing? That they could look to that?
I'm just curious.
Well, remember the story of the serpent on the pole?
Right.
Where when they looked to it, they were healed. And Jesus is the fulfillment of that, and John's Gospel talks about that, when the Son of Man is lifted up, like the serpent on the pole. So I think that does have a connection. They needed something to see, to look at. You could say, humanity for so long longed for something they could see and touch of God, and they finally were able to in Jesus.
Like Thomas, that's coming up this Sunday, right? I don't know
Yes.
if it's up the reading or not, but I need to touch this, I need to see this tangible thing. So it continues.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Don't you think Thomas, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, how is faith to Hebrews?
Substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
Right. And as Jesus said about Thomas after he let him touch him, and now blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. So if you haven't seen and you're believing, blessed are you, and that's where we are, right? Yes, Dan?
Yeah, I'm saying that I think John's Gospel is probably the most metaphoric of the Gospels, the most theological of them all. And I'm just wondering, because it's interesting, because that's the only Gospel where clearly Jesus is linked as God. whereas the other ones are, you know, they're elusive. You don't fully have that there, but Thomas says, "My Lord, my God." And before that, they said he's the Son of God. They never said, you know, he was God. And I just always found it interesting that,
Yeah, the four Gospels represent four different accounts. And maybe you've heard this metaphor before, but somebody said if you were a blind man and an elephant, four blind men are in a pit and an elephant falls in, and each one has a different part and they're describing it. So one's got the ear, one's got the trunk, one's got the tail, one's got a hoof. They describe it differently, but it's the same elephant. And that's what the four Gospels are like. You know, different perspectives of the same event or series of events. Very human, yet also very divine. So, all right, we'll continue on with Joshua. Now it asks in the 5th verse, more than one miracle, or the 5th question, more than one miracle was involved in the story of the Jordan crossing. See how many you can identify. Water parting is one. Do you see others?
The ground is dry.
Ground is dry.
The riverbed should
Yeah.
be muddy.
Good point. There we are. I'd say getting 2 million people across safely is a miracle.
Yeah, really.
The fact that the tribes did not come after them and try to attack them as they came across the river, I don't know if that's a miracle, but I find that to be strategically interesting. Because we talked about the geography. It's not that big of a distance between Jericho and these tribes. And, you know, I think you said last week, Harlan, that people would most likely see them lined up along the shore. At certain points, they'd seen them before, most likely.
But if they see the rivers, I mean, if they see that stuff going on, I mean, instead of attacking them, they could have turned around and run the other way, right? I mean, all of a sudden you see that they've got more strength and power than just.
All right, here's a good question. Question 6. Where were the first 12 memorial stones set up? I think we answered that, Gilgal.
Yeah, right.
Where were the other 12 stones set up? In the river. What was the purpose of memorial stones? Are Christians today served by any kinds of memorials? If so, what are they? Father George can probably talk about this because we've got a lot of memorial plaques from a long time ago and current ones, and they do have a purpose in my opinion, but they're not quite the same as these stones. But we still have memorials, don't we? Remembrances, because we tend to forget.
We have,
There was a time when a lady asked me wanted to name one of the classrooms as a memorial to her father and mother. And she didn't come to church hardly at all, and father and mother were real questionable. They didn't come that often, and they wanted a memorial room for it. And they were quite willing to pay for $60 or $70 to put the plaque up. I said, you don't understand. You have to give a contribution to maybe the mission of the church, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 maybe for mission. Then we'll name a room after you. Oh, really? It had to mean something. You know, it was just a plaque for us, and then it would have a meaning, but nothing behind it.
Name a room after me, I'll buy a plaque.
Joshua's lineage with Moses and the memorials, you know, almost, you know, the thought of the Passover with Moses. So, you know, Joshua has that lineage, and he's going to set a memorial the same way. He's obviously not going to be able to, you know, do the Passover like, you know, like Moses did, but Joshua has his own memorial that he sets. And in a way, when he tells from the previous chapter, when he tells the lookouts, or, you know, the reconnaissance men to go and, you know, wave the red flag there, you know, sort of like the red mark over the doors, so God would pass over the Hebrews' houses and the slaying of the firstborn and stuff. So there is a lot of connection between the two men.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And even today, outside of Jerusalem, there's a huge Jewish cemetery with stones, and you see this all over the world, stones piled on the graves. Romans are the ones who put flowers on graves. Jewish people never did that, and don't to this day for the most part. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, we put stones on.
You put stones, and that's where this comes from. Pretty interesting. Sometimes I'll be driving down the road and I'll see in someone's yard like a stone tower, and I just wonder sometimes, is that a Jewish moment of devotion or is it artistic? We don't know, but that's where it comes from. And the great thing about stones versus flowers is they don't rot away.
Right.
As your picture showed us, they stay there.
Who puts the stones on, the gravestones?
Usually the relatives.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
As bringing it back to this instance, in this example, or to signify something else? That I was there and I remember?
Yeah, that's what I've always thought since I was a kid. I always thought it was just as a memorial, but again, it's the same thing. I mean, he's leaving the stones, you know, after they leave the Jordan, he tells them to take, you know, the boulders, and we're gonna make a memorial for this moment, which is what, from now on, when your children ask, this is what it's going to be for. So, that you will remember the power of God and the, you know, the holy ground that was created here.
The fact that they had the 12 for each tribe too, I think brings, that it's the whole, like it's, like they're all together, it wasn't like they left 2 out or whatever, so it, you know, it wasn't just one big boulder or whatever. They got the 12, so I think the memorial was more all-inclusive.
We need a place to focus, and the memorial, the stones were an altar. It's a place to focus and remember what happened. And you know, in one sense, we've got an altar in the church that we focus on, and we think about God's presence in the communion elements or whatever, and that's one way. Or we build monuments like the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial to help us, and we can focus on those things and remember who the people that they represent, or the events that they represent in our history. So.
Well, plus it was an oral tradition, and when the youth come and they see the altar, or they see the stones, they ask what happened here.
Yes.
So it gives them the opportunity to tell the story again, so that's the memorial.
Yeah.
So they continue the history of the people.
How about don't leave any stone unturned? I wonder if that's significant, you know?
Yeah.
Just expect a miracle. Don't leave any stone unturned. God can do anything.
I like that.
Well, for 9/11, right, the memorial there, that's our reaction, you know, like we have those beautiful fountains there. I've never seen it, but I hear people actually go there and they sketch their loved ones' names that were perished. And that way, you know, it really is hollow ground. And the way I'm surprised they built that tower there, because it's pretty much a cemetery. A lot of people just be
That's true. And there's some towns in the New York metro area, I'm sure you've seen them, where they'll have 9/11 memorials for people in that town. And, you know, big granite, stone, or however they do it. Now, Harlan talked about communion, and we call communion the memorial of our redemption. You've heard that said by the priest a number of times, right? And with Jesus being the chief cornerstone, as the New Testament describes it, being rejected, but the chief cornerstone, that becomes our true memorial, the memorial of our redemption. Nothing we can put out there is going to suffice. It's a matter of faith in God, as revealed in Jesus. So he left us a memorial of our redemption. He said, do this in remembrance of me. So rather than piling stones up, what we do is I guess you could say, we offer our stony hearts on the altar, and he makes us new and refreshes us, as only he can do through his body and blood. And he makes all things new. So that's what I think of when I think of a memorial, the memorial of our redemption, chiefly.
I don't know how many people I talked out of scattering ashes when somebody died. They wanted to just scatter the ashes. I thought it was so dramatic. I said, no, you got to have a place to remember Aunt Tilly by. You got to have a place, a memorial for her. And they changed their mind, and they put it in the garden. And those are the ones that are attended the most. There's somebody down on the corner way down there always has plastic flowers on it, but they're always remembered. Somebody, that was an afterthought. They were going to scatter the ashes. They didn't want it. Then changed their mind. And
Well, it does go back to that theme we've heard tonight, which is it's human nature to want to be able to see something divine and even to hold on to it, certainly to follow it.
For me, my favorite memorial has always been and is the cross, because everywhere I go and I see a cross, you know, just symbolic of what the faith is all about. Nowhere where you drive in the United States, you know, especially in the South, in this area, that cross is so significant.
I also feel very good when I see the Star of David. And even though I believe the Star of David was devised long after King David's life, the Star of David has a very special appearance, at least to me. It's very holy. I don't know what it is about it.
Yeah.
And then when you see like a necklace, which some Messianic Jewish people wear, do you all know what a Messianic Jewish person is? Somebody who retains their Jewish identity and traditions, but also follows Jesus Christ. And oftentimes they'll have a necklace that has both the Star of David and a cross. We saw that in Israel, didn't we, George?
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay. Let's, we talked about where the memorial stones were set up. And we're coming to the last 5 minutes. What Bill read, verse 1 from chapter 5, bless you. What evidence is furnished by the first verse of the 5th chapter that the Jordan crossing was miraculous?
All the natives are scared.
So there's a testimony, right? What would you be thinking if you were one of those kings?
Time to get out of town.
Good.
But my walls are strong, exactly.
Teach me, dear Lord, to number my days.
That's right. And just a little tip, if you haven't read ahead, that ark is going to continue.
Round and around.
So the power that is revealed with the ark will be seen. So they've heard the stories about the Red Sea. Remember, Rahab said, we know all about your God. And that's why she did the right thing and protected the spies. So it was not a huge region, as we talked about, and it was an oral tradition. People talked. They didn't have television or radios or iPhones. They talked. And so, of course, they knew the stories, and I'm sure this spread quickly. Who's ever heard of a river forming a wall? I mean, and they're coming for you. This has to be alarming. All right, what do these chapters we read, the 2 chapters, teach about leadership and about following? What's it all about?
Nice to have God on your side.
Focus on God and listen and obey. Pretty much it's been reinforced throughout the whole book. Is you have to focus on God, keep it on the ark, focus on the Hebrew, and they develop into eventually to be the Jewish people.
Well, I think in terms of the followers, they have to believe that what they're trying to, they have to believe in what they're trying to go after, because they're not being forced to go across the Jordan or go into the promised land or that. They're kind of going on their, seems like they're going on their free will. So so I think there's a lot to that in terms of into the following. They have to believe in the miracles and all that kind of help reinforce that, but they got to have that faith and they got to believe that that's what they want to do.
Can I push back a little bit? Think about this though, they were in the desert for already 40 years. So these guys don't have a say. They're in the middle of the desert. They're gonna have to go, they're gonna have to settle somewhere. So I do think in a way they didn't really have a say. And then they saw what happened if you didn't obey God.
Yeah, but you could say, yeah, not to push back, but you could say, okay, you've been in the desert for 40 years. You have a couple of generations there. Some of them don't know Egypt. They could turn around. The fact that they decided, to me, it was more powerful that they decided to keep going to something that they didn't know what to expect. They knew it was the promised land, but they really didn't know what it was going to be like once they got there. I don't think.
And keep in mind, this is a new, young generation for the most part.
Right.
Under the new leadership.
Right.
So their faith is going to look differently in many ways from the past generation, the grumblers. At this point, when we think about following God, obedience to God, not being afraid, we see this fulfilled in Jesus. And I'd like Lou to read Mark 16, verses 6 through 7, especially as we're in what's called Eastertide, this 40 days of Easter. This is a great scripture for this purpose. And then we'll close with prayer. Keeping our brother Tim in mind tonight.
Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell the disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you.
He had said, I'll go ahead of you. You see the parallelism? The ark goes ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
The ark, which signifies Christ, as we understand it, he's the one who goes before us. So this week, I pray that we will look to Jesus and believe that he's going ahead of us into those difficult places that we may not know how to deal with. Ask him to go ahead of you and to fix problems before you get to them. And you might be surprised by how the week goes. So let us pray. Loving God, we are very thankful for this hour together as your men. And one of our men is not with us tonight. He's in the ER, Tim, and we ask you to heal him and to fill him with your loving presence through the Spirit, that he may be back with his family and back among us by next week. And we thank you, Lord, that you go ahead of us, just as you promised, just as you did for your people as of old. We believe that you are the memorial that we need, a memorial that is with us through the Spirit and ever going before us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Does everybody have a study guide? Okay, I still have extras. If you know of anybody who needs one, men can always join this group, even though we're into the 4th and 5th chapters now. So read ahead for next week, and thank you for your great comments.
Are those rocks, did you bring them back from your trips, or are those from Connecticut?
I don't know where they came from. Expect a miracle. I just showed up. Great prop for the TV, though.